Calcutta does not have a birthday, but it has some markers of urbanization. To claim that any city was founded on a specific day would mean dismissing early years of settlement. In the case of Calcutta, Charnock did not chance upon barren land because settlements predated his arrival. A 2003 judgment by the Calcutta High Court should have settled any dispute that may have existed concerning the date of birth of the city of Calcutta. But some 2 decades later, August 24 invariably generates discussion of the city's age, its date of founding, and Job Charnock, whom many credit for having found the city of Calcutta. After months of deliberation in what was considered to be a historic judgment, the Calcutta High Court had said that Charnock was not the founder of the city of Calcutta and directed the West Bengal government to stop associating Charnock's name in the context, including removing textual reference to it and to not celebrate August 24 as the city's birthday. Very simply, the High Court had said Calcutta does not have a birthday. To claim that any city was founded on a specific day would mean dismissing early years of settlement. In the case of Calcutta, Charnock did not chance upon barren land because settlements predated his arrival. Historians don't see a particular date as very crucial because a city cannot grow in a day. It is true that Job Charnock came on a day and there are records of that, and he decided that there would be a settlement here. But that was not the city, says Partho Datta, for professor of history at JNU and author of Planning the City, Urbanization and Reform in Calcutta. The crucial question for me as an urban historian is, when does it take the contours of a city? A city means a lot of people staying together. There are institutions, a government, there is economic activity, cultural activity. It is markedly not rural. There are urban attributes, explains Datta. Hence, for an urban history perspective, Calcutta's story as one of the greatest cities of its time doesn't start from 1690, the year Charnock's landing. Datta believed that one of the most significant developments that gave the city a semblance of urban formation occurred in 1756 when the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj ud Doula, laid siege to Calcutta in retaliation from the British East India Company, engaging in unauthorized development of the structure that is now known as Fort William. The East India Company was defeated in a decisive battle, making them realize the vulnerability of the fort. Datta says that post 1757, when the fort was remade and fortified with enhanced protection, the construction was exceptionally well done. It was really this attack on Fort William, a bastion of the British and other Europeans living there, that changed the map of Calcutta. The Europeans who used to primarily live inside the fort, the European merchants, the administrators, etc., started moving out. They knew that if there was an attack, there was infrastructure to save them. That is when places like Chaurangi, Esplanade were set up. That was European Calcutta, what we called White Town. Simultaneously, while the fort was being rebuilt and fortified, there was another important development happening on the sidelines. The British East India Company had started an ambitious initiative for which they required a large number of laborers. We have evidence that they were recruited laborers and quite deliberately went to surrounding districts, even to further to Bihar, Odisha, to recruit poor people seeking jobs. We have evidence that people migrated to build this fort, explains Datta. To accommodate this planned migration of laborers, the British East India Company turned to a Muslim burial ground near Fort William and set up what was known as Kuli Bazar, where these laborers were given a place to stay while they worked on the construction of this fort, writes historian P. Thankapan Nair in his book The Growth and Development of Old Calcutta. In Calcutta, the living city. Thus, this started a process of migration from what we call the urban history, the hinterland. So, the poor who moved into the city also gave it its character, explains Datta. The establishment of the Government House in 1767 and the Lottery Commission in 1817 were the other important development in the city's history that gave its urban landscape more defined contours. This commission was entirely responsible for the setting up of cities' roads, streets, and lanes. Some markers of urban settlements include planned roads, water supply, and transport, and Datta says that the establishment of these in the early 19th century was responsible for making Calcutta the great city that eventually became. Following the establishment of the Lottery Committee, one of the most important urban development projects undertaken by the British East India Company included the laying down of the long stretch of road that is now called Bidhan Sarani in North Calcutta. This is an attribute of a city where you have a very important thoroughfare being laid down. Once this road was laid down, institutions began coming up on this road, like schools and colleges. It shows that urban, social, and cultural activity was happening. The city started getting character. It was no longer just a settlement, explains Datta. Along this axis, in the early 1800s, some of the city's most important institutions were set up, like the Hindu College that became Presidency College, Medical College and Hospital, and further up north the Brahmo Samaj. This whole debate of Calcutta being founded on a particular day, according to me, is not fruitful. It took long time and some broad political, social, economic activities that happened in phases gave character to the city. That was how the city was founded in phases, Datta adds. The markers that make an urban settlement a city only happened in the 19th century for Calcutta, when it eventually did records show that it developed as one of with a sizable population to become one of the great metropolis of the 19th century comparable to other European states. The 2003 Calcutta High Court judgment was the result of a petition filed by Sabarna Roy Chaudhary family, who had claimed ownership of a significant portion of the land that now forms Calcutta, challenging the official date of birth of the city, claiming that Charnock had arrived in Calcutta in 1676. City-based historian and co-founder of the Immersive Trails, Tathagata Niyogi, says the connection of the Roy Chaudhary family to the discourse surrounding the ownership and history of Calcutta can be found in archives and deeds where rights over the land were handed over to the British East India Company. The three villages Govindpur, Sutani, Kalikata that were combined to form Calcutta were part of the Khas land owned directly by the Mughal emperor, under whom the Sabarna Roy Chaudhary family were Jamindars, Niyogi said. In the Mughal system of government, a Jamindar was the emperor's representative who oversaw the emperor's land and collected taxes on his behalf. So, a Jamindar in Mughal administration set up indirectly an employee of the emperor. They did not own the land as payment for being the emperor representative and tax collector. They could keep a fraction of the revenue they collected for themselves, says Niyogi. In 1697, the transaction that happened between Sabarna Roy Chaudhary family and the East India Company was not of the ownership rights, but rather the Jamindari rights of the three villages, after which the British became the next tax collectors for Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. This company misunderstood. Based on their knowledge of how landholding worked in England, they thought that Jamindars, like English landlords, owned their lands, sometimes for generations, and paid taxes to the monarch. Because Jamindari was translated as landlordship, the company had assumed that the transaction on November 10, 1697 was a transfer of proprietary rights over these three villages. This misinterpretation would create problems later, Niyogi explains. It is this misinterpretation from where much of the debate surrounding the early urban history of Calcutta starts. The date 1690 is convenient marker. We shouldn't discount that. This date is also important because it marks the start of British rule, especially since Calcutta was the diamond in the empire, says Datta. No city is built in a day. It is a long process. The question for any urban historian is that what are the markers of any great city and how did they become about? Thank you.